Hello everybody, my name is Don Cipollini. I'm a professor of biology at Wright State University. I'm a resident of Yellow Springs, Ohio, and we're going to try something here we're calling the Naturalist, a series of walks and talks about some things I know a little bit about and would like to share with you. So we're going to do episode number 1 today at Huffman Prairie on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And this is the historic site of, based on the Wright brothers, where they practiced flying. And but it's been restored as a native prairie. And so I'd like to take you around the restored area at Huffman Prairie and talk to you a little bit about what we see. All right, let's go. Okay, here we are at Huffman Prairie, and we are on the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In this base, the setting for this base is a large area that had been glaciated, all right? So it's very flat, and which of course makes it very useful for laying out runways for airplanes and so forth. And which is the kind of traits that the Wright brothers saw in this area when they decided to practice flying in this area. But what we're going to talk about today is the presence of native prairie and the large prairie restoration that's occurred on this site. And this is a state natural landmark now as a result of it. So when the Wright brothers first came here, this would have been a farmed field. It was either pastured or farmed, and which had been disrupted quite a bit by human activities at that point. But some remnants of native prairie remained at that time, okay? Native tall grasses, some of which you see in the distance there, and other herbs. Flowering plants you might recognize. And just a few decades ago, it was recognized the value of this area, and people decided to restore it back to tall grass prairie, which would have been here historically. So let's take a walk around this restored area and talk about some of the plants and animals we might see and insects we might see that kind of highlight this area. I'm going to start with an animal right in front of me that just happened to fly here and land on a grass. It's a dog day or annual cicada. And these are the kind of cicadas that come out every year around this time in the dog days. And they're very active right now. They're calling. And these aren't the periodical cicadas that come out once every 17 years. We had those in 2021 here in this area. But nonetheless, these are fun. These are here every year, black and green, and they're calling very actively right now. So that was kind of a fun coincidence. Okay, now the plant this cicada landed on is one of the stunners of the tall grass prairie. It's called big blue stem grass, or turkeyfoot, which you can see because of the turkeyfoot shaped flowering spikes there. Those are actually the flowers of the grass right there. People forget that grass is actually flower. And big blue stem, which you can also see in the distance here, is one of the characteristic plants of the tall grass prairie. And these plants can get very large, 10, 12 feet tall, along with other grasses, would have formed an extremely dense canopy for, the first people to have come through this area and through the prairie and decided to, in many cases, farm these areas and disrupt it. I'm seeing these cicadas all over this area, by the way, so they're very active right now. I also hear crickets and katydids and grasshoppers in the distance. All right, so there's a trail system through Huffman Prairie of mowed grass trails. And let's just walk one. This trail's about a mile long, so I'll try to keep up my pace and point out and talk about a few things as we go. Now, before I got anywhere else, here's another grass of the tall grass prairie. This is called Indian grass. Again, this is its flowering head. This is a relatively short specimen. These also can get to be 8 to 10 feet tall and are a key component of the tall grass prairie. Okay, we're heading basically east into the sun at the moment. This is August 22nd, 2023. It's a beautiful, actually cool summer day at the moment, although we have a lot of hot weather on our way in the next few days. Well, here's an interesting plant. It's a little bit past flowering, okay? It's currently forming its maturing seeds in its seed heads. This is a plant called cup plant. Okay, and it's called cup plant because the leaves form a cup where they meet the stem. These leaves are connected and the stem penetrates the leaves and forms a depression that can actually collect water. Now, it has not rained here in a number of days now, so I don't see any that are currently holding water. But those little depressions, those little cups are very important for wildlife. Here's one that still has some water, if that's visible. Those little depressions with water are utilized by birds and by bees and other insects to take a little drink while they're out here active. And so it's really fun to watch things utilizing these plants as a little water source, a bird bath even. Okay, so again, this is a large plant, very rough leaves. A lot of these large prairie plants like this are adapted to ward off grazing because there would have been a lot of large grazers historically that lived in these areas that fed on them. Think bison, elk, and so forth. So these have evolved leaves to tolerate or resist that as much as possible. A lot of these plants also have extremely deep root systems because in the prairie it can get very dry and hot. Okay, so this really differentiates the kind of grasses we're seeing here with your typical lawn grass, which only has shallow roots in a turf-like formation. And so, you know, these native grasslands and the plants are all deep-rooted, which give them a lot of high qualities for ecosystem services and so forth. Okay, here's a pretty plant that flowers this time of year, and this is ironweed. Okay, this plant here with these bright purple flowers. The white flowers you see in front of me right here are a very common plant around this area. This is actually a non-native plant. It's called Queen Anne's lace with this bright white flower head. It's also known as wild carrot. So it has a lot of relatives in that family, the Apiaceae, carrot, parsley, poison hemlock. All these plants are in the same family, have similar characteristics. But this is one a lot of people recognize, and this is called Queen Anne's lace. This site is managed in different ways as well. You can manage prairies in a number of different ways, and you need to manage prairies or else they typically will turn back into woodlands with tree encroachment. So if you want to keep it as a prairie, you have to manage it either by cutting, periodic cutting, by grazing animals on it, or by burning. All right, and so at this site they do a variety of those techniques because again, the fire part in particular is a natural phenomenon. Periodic fires would have occurred in prairies, both naturally occurring fires from lightning strikes and things like that. But also, you know, Native Americans would manage prairies with fire in many cases to keep them open, keep them as grazing sites for animals that they hunted and so forth. So that has to be done, and that's done in a variety of ways here at Huffman Prairie. All right, here's a tall stand of a plant that looks ominous. It's kind of prickly, and it's called thistle. This is field thistle, and produces beautiful lavender colored flowers. They're a little bit thorny, a little bit spiky, and this is a good native thistle species. Now, there are a number of non-native thistle species that grow in roadsides or become weeds in pastures that we'd rather not have, okay? But this is one that is native and that we would like to have in our areas. And one way you can distinguish this one is because of the really white undersides of its leaves, okay? Dark green above, very whitish on its underside. That's a characteristic of field thistle. There's a tall stand of it right here. And as you can see, as we'll walk around, we'll see there's lots of pollinators out. It's about 10:30 in the morning. I see bumblebees in front of me. There's some honeybees. We'll see plenty of butterflies in time, beetles and flies and so forth. So all of these plants in places like this are very important for pollinators. Okay, here's a plant that's pretty common in meadows and prairies. And it has a little feature that leads to its common name. If you look at the stems of this plant closely, it looks like they have wings on their stem. Okay? And that gives rise to its common name. This is wing stem. Has these kind of ragged, drooping flowers, bright yellow, kind of a very prolific plant. And there are honeybees all over it in front of me right now. It's kind of convenient when a plant is named after what it looks like or what it features. I see a lot of little birds, prairie-associated birds like goldfinches. And goldfinches like to feed on thistles and seeds of these large prairie flowers that we're seeing. Let's move quickly through this part. Here's a thistle that's more mature, and you can see the seed dispersal mechanisms of a thistle. Okay, each one of these umbrellas or parachutes made of fluff has a seed at its base. And there they go. Live long and prosper. Okay, we're getting into an area that's has more abundant grass. So that indicates that it's either slightly different soil type than where we were, maybe drier than where we were, or that it was just replanted in a different way or managed in a different way. Here's some signs, for example, about the management. What you tend to see is the more frequent burning occurs, the more abundant the grasses become in these prairie plant mixtures, okay? Because they're more tolerant of repeated cutting and burning than the wildflowers that we're seeing. So here's an area that's very grassy. In fact, more short grasses through here as well. Here's a plant I'll step out for a second to show you. This plant is called Blazing Star, and it's a nice purple flower and a spike-like inflorescence, and this has grown ornamentally quite a bit by people as well. So this area was, I believe this area was burned last year, so, but I'm not totally sure. Hear a lot of crickets. It's that time of year. These sounds always are indicators of the dog days, summer. The cicadas, the crickets, the katydids, becoming very active. Here's a pretty plant lots of people like and grow in their own backyards, or front yards for that matter. This is purple coneflower. And again, this is a native plant, and it's true for a lot of the plants that we're seeing. These are native plants, but there are cultivated varieties of many of these plants that might have been slightly modified through breeding or selection for particular traits. But this is one that you can find in the horticultural trade and purchase and grow on your own easily. I see some butterflies. There's a sulfur butterfly flying around there. It's a nice cool morning today. It's about 75 degrees right now. And in 2 days, it's supposed to be 96 degrees. So we're in for it soon. It's quite breezy too, which you'll probably hear in my audio. In the distance, if you can see it, are some of the buildings of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they house the large cargo planes that are located on this base, and other vehicles. But this will give you a nice view. If you just look across this is one of our larger prairie restorations in this whole area, okay? It'll give you a vision of what this area might have looked like for the first colonists, or even the first Native Americans that came through here. Unfortunately, we've disrupted a lot of these places by draining them and farming them and so forth, and building on them. So it's very important to maintain what we have in this regard and restore what we can, because so much of it has been lost. And again, prairies are kind of unique and special too, because nature itself is trying to get rid of them with woody plant encroachment. This would go back to being a forest if it were allowed. That's where the management comes in. Heading east again. Soon we'll turn and we won't face the sun quite so much, which ought to make it a little easier to see things. All right, in this section we have a few native shrubby plants. This is blackberry. Okay, so this plant back in June would have been producing berries that you could eat. Most of you are familiar with blackberries, blackberry jam, blackberry pie. We are a little past the peak of flowering here at Huffman Prairie. The peak is probably more in the order of late July. If you wanted to come here and maximize your view of prairie wildflowers, that's probably the best time. But things change throughout the year. Things come and go. They have different flowering periods, and there's always something different. And when I go to a natural area, I you know, you go visit about once every 2 weeks and you'll be seeing something different each time. Here's a mass of little purple flowers that belong to a plant called trefoil. And here's, this plant is in the legume family. And so here you can see the little bean that trefoil makes, which kind of tells you that it's in that family, the bean family. And so that's one of our trefoil species. Note, by the way, there are several species of each of the plants I'm pointing out in some cases. So I'm not really distinguishing the exact species every time. So just keep that in mind. Here's a little patch of dogwoods. These look like gray dogwoods, which are a native dogwood species. And I always like to point out, again, this is a tree, a small tree, point out how you identify a dogwood by its leaf. And dogwoods, if you look at the veins of a dogwood, the lateral veins never quite reach the margin of the leaf, okay? They curl around and they all end up pointing toward the end of the leaf. So that's a characteristic of dogwoods. That gets you in the ballpark to say, hey, I think that's a dogwood. And then you can use other characteristics to identify the particular species. Now, there are other plants out there that have these kinds of leaf veins. But if you're looking at a small tree with leaves like that, that'll get you in the ballpark of dogwoods. Here's a patch of them in front of me. Over here on the right are some, I don't know how well you could see this, but they are setting fruit. And this particular species makes white fruits, all right? I see dragonflies out in front of me. This area would be visited quite a bit by dragonflies hunting. Dragonflies are predators. And you know, they eat a lot of insects on the wing. They're hunters. And, but they also, as larvae, eat a lot of insects and mosquitoes and things like that as larvae. People kind of forget about that part of their life cycle, but there's one right in front of me. I'll see if I can hold it. Nope, flew away. Dogwoods are one of our earlier trees to turn in the fall as well. So here we are on August 22nd. And some of these dogwoods are quite far along in terms of turning fall colors already. So they're kind of a harbinger of fall. All right, now we're heading more south through the prairie. Again, through an area of a lot of tall grasses. See a sulfur butterfly in front of me. It's quite pleasant out here right now. On Thursday, I probably wouldn't come back here on Thursday. It's also pleasant because we're past biting fly season. Things like black flies or horse flies are not bad, or deer flies are not bad right now. Very grassy through here. Again, these grasses, these native prairie grasses, Indian grass and big blue stem and little blue stem, you know, these are acceptable forage for cattle and livestock and so forth. But generally, when European colonists came and started to create pastures out of these areas, they replaced these grasses with usually European grasses that were thought to be more nutritious for cattle and so forth and livestock. A little easier to digest, smaller, easier to manage. And so a lot of these native grasses, although grazers will feed on them, were replaced by non-native grasses, rye grasses and timothy hay and things like that. These grasses are tougher. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they're a little less digestible. These stalks, when they're dried, you can actually use them to make things, baskets, roofing material. They were used in a lot of ways by Native Americans and even European colonists because they do have a tough, fibrous nature to them. And once you dry them out, they're also resistant to microbial degradation. As you walk around Huffman Prairie too, you see where moisture varies in soil. So here we're in a spot that's a little more of a little depression. It would hold some moister soil. We're seeing a lot greater mixture of what we call forbs, the broad-leaved plants. And in the distance, you can see how grassy it is. Okay, a little higher, a little drier. Grasses like those kind of conditions. Here's a plant that's a relative of milkweeds. A lot of people know milkweeds as the host plant for monarch butterflies, but this is a relative. This is called dogbane or Indian hemp. These are the seed pods that are developing on it. And this plant will host monarch butterflies as well. And again, milkweeds and their close relatives are distinguished by this milky sap that they produce when you break a leaf open or break a stem. That's the name milkweed. That milkweed, that sap contains toxins. Toxins like heart poisons, cardiac glycosides they're called. And the whole idea is that butterflies and a few other insects that specialize on milkweeds have adapted ways to not be killed by those toxins. That allows these insects to utilize this host plant while other insects and animals can't. And they now have access to a resource that other species can't use because it's toxic. Now, to adapt to a toxic plant like that, they've had to evolve adaptations in their metabolism of foreign chemicals and in their digestion systems and their feeding patterns, and many different aspects go into being able to eat a toxic plant without dying. But they can do it, and that gives them a leg up. Okay, here's a plant that is still flowering. It's past in most places. So this is royal catchfly, okay? This bright red plant. It's a little bit unique. We haven't seen any other red flowers today so far. And royal catchfly is called that partly because it is sticky when you feel it. And it can actually capture little insects in that sticky exudate it makes. Okay, so it's a nice, pretty, bright red flower, which is unique in this habitat. A lot of these large prairie plants have yellow flowers. That's a characteristic of the family that they're in. A lot of these are in the aster family, or the Asteraceae. A lot of these tall plants we're seeing. Various sunflowers, goldenrods, asters are all in this family. A lot of them make yellow flowers. It's interesting. Why is that? Okay, in front of me, oh, they flew away. They're flying in front of me are two robber flies mating, okay, mating in mid-flight. Robber flies, I'm not going to be able to get close to them, but robber flies are predators. They'll catch insects on the wing, And I've seen them grab cicadas as they fly. They're a large insect, they're a large fly, and voracious predators of large insects. Here's a nice, very diverse spot. In front of me, I'm seeing, again, the purple coneflowers. I see some royal catchfly, the field thistles. I see some compass plants and sunflowers back there. Nice spot. Would have been a little bit nicer about 2 weeks ago or so, but it's still a beautiful area. Some more royal catchflies. This plant, which is not quite flowering yet, but setting up to flower, is stiff goldenrod. And it has different leaf structure than most goldenrods. I'll point those out to you soon. And these are just about to start flowering, but I see a lot of them in this particular area. So, like I said, there's always something coming along in a prairie deep into fall. People think fall starts when school, or fall is here or almost over when school starts, but no, there'll be plants in flower out here until November or even the 1st of December. Here are the seed heads of the blazing star. There's various signage here at Huffman Prairie that help you interpret what you're seeing and why. All right. Very beautiful patch here with coneflowers and sunflowers. Again, the plant people recognize as sunflower, annual sunflowers. They get planted in fields and people take pictures of. That is a domesticated native plant. Now, we've domesticated it to produce larger heads and more seeds and so forth, but that is derived from a native plant, native to North America. And again, we're looking at its little relatives near us right now. I see some grapevines mixed into the array here. So this plant right here is grapevine. All right, and so grapevines are distinguished by this characteristic. These are tendrils. These are touch-sensitive organs of grapevines, and some other plant species have these. Okay, these help in the climbing process. So these tendrils are touch sensitive. Over time, they will coil around an object that they've been touching for a while, and helps a vine grab on to things around it, whether that's another plant, a fence post, a tree, what have you. Now, I've noticed this here before, but there's a royal catchfly variety in this little spot that's different than the bright red one that we've been seeing, which is in front of us. And it's this one, okay? It's very pinkish. And I presume that's just a variant, a mutant of the typical royal catchfly. It's really interesting and unique, and I have seen those in this area before. So there's a pink royal catchfly here. There's a big patch with a lot of Indian grass and big blue stem. You can see the biomass, the sheer amount of biomass that's produced by these plants. And when that dries down, that's great fodder for fires, as you can imagine. And now we're heading west. There's a plant over here I'll spend a minute describing, which is interesting. And it's the very tall one you see as we approach here. Okay, this plant ahead of us, which as I stand here is about, it's about 8 feet tall, 8.5 feet tall, can get taller. This is called prairie dock. And again, it's a sunflower relative. And it has this very tall flowering stalk, but you don't see many leaves on that part of it. It has these very large basal leaves only. And in fact, you can barely even see them. Some of them have been torn away or eaten away. Here's a remnant of one of the leaves. And they're very thick, very leathery. And an interesting fun thing about those big leaves, they provide a lot of surface for evaporation to occur. And because they're doing that, they're physically cool to the touch. So they're several degrees cooler to the touch than the ambient air around you. So whenever you, if you're stuck in a prairie and you're baking hot, just find a prairie dock leaf and lay it on your forehead and it'll cool you down like a nice cool washcloth. Yeah, lots of royal catchfly still blooming. I'm kind of surprised. Has a pretty long flowering season. Flowers vary quite a bit in their flowering season. Some flower maybe for only a week or less, some for many weeks, and some continuously flower for almost the whole season. So it varies quite a bit out here in nature. And if you're in your own garden, it's always nice to try to put in a variety of plants that will be flowering at different times of the year so that you always have something out there that's flowering. Here's some signage about some of the plants that we've seen. A little bit more scientific detail if you're interested. And we're now approaching a restoration of the hangar where the Wright brothers would have stored their planes as they were practicing. And it's an interesting spot. We'll take a quick look at it. Okay, this is the restored hangar. And one fun thing about it is that birds will nest in here. Swallows, barn swallows. Okay, here's one of their nests right here. They basically make a mud nest. They glue it to the sides of walls and either stone or wooden buildings. Here's another one. It's been nestled up there. And now they've fledged their young quite a while ago now, but I've been in this hangar in the past when there were, several nests in here and have, 8 to 10 of these birds flying around your head trying to scare you away from their nest. All right, so this is the restored hangar, kind of fun. So that concludes my tour of the Huffman Prairie State Natural Landmark on the historic site of the Wright brothers flying field. And this is a naturalist signing off for today. Thanks. See you again.